Hey, it's time for TV Skywriter. Greetings, everybody. Welcome to TV Skywriter. I'm Patricia A. Murray, your host, and this show emanates from Durham, North Carolina, where I live now. I'm sporting my Southside Scoop t-shirt. That's a t-shirt the newspaper I used to publish in Chicago, my hometown. The reason I'm doing that is because my guest is a good friend from Chicago, Carolyn Wilkins. Welcome to the show, Carolyn.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here.
And you're not actually in Chicago because, like me, you've left town. Where do you live now?
Yes, I live in Cambridge, Massachusetts, but I will always consider myself to be from Chicago.
Yeah, now, we're not on the show just to shoot the breeze. I mean, you were on the show before because you've written two.
Yes.
Have you written two nonfiction books or more than two?
I have written a textbook about singing and two nonfiction memoirs. And I think for each one of those memoirs, I came on and talked to you.
Yeah, well, now, to my great surprise and delight, you are now a fiction writer as well. Bam!
Yay!
Melody for Murder. I can't believe that no one has thought of that name before. That title.
It turns out there are a lot of ones that are very close, and apparently somebody did think of the name, but about 10 years ago or whatever, so we decided that it was okay to use it again.
You need to do like one of those trailers where somebody with a really deep voice says Melody for Murder.
Exactly. Yeah. And you know what? I have one. And in fact, I want to let people know that I have a YouTube channel and I have a playlist that's called Melody for Murder. And you can watch, I actually wrote a song called Melody for Murder. And when the book first came out last month, I did a concert with my jazz group and we played all my original music. I chose music that was kind of suitable for the mood of a murder mystery, like you're watching one of those old detective movies or something. And I wrote the theme song, Melody for Murder. And so if you're at all curious about that, I have a short little one that operates kind of like a book trailer. And that is on my Melody for Murder playlist on the Carolyn Wilkins YouTube channel.
I cannot wait to check that out. I have no idea. Yay. Because let's tie this all in. Actually, your 9-to-5 job is you're a professor at Berkeley in Boston.
Yes, yes, I do.
You know, a lot of us don't know about jazz and we might not know about Berkeley. Can you tell us what Berkeley is?
Absolutely. Berkeley is, I'm pretty sure that I am not misstating this. It is the largest contemporary music school in the country and possibly the world. Maybe not, maybe China has something bigger, but Berkeley is all dedicated to teaching contemporary music, although they do have orchestras now and a string department and all these other things. But it was founded in the mid-40s to teach people how to play jazz, which at the time was a bit of a mystery. If you weren't lucky enough to know a really fine jazz musician who would consent to teach you or you hang around, there was no way to really learn. And so the people who founded Berkeley had an idea that it would be a college where people could learn, just like you go to study Mozart and Beethoven, that you could go to study Duke Ellington and Count Basie and Charlie Parker, etc. And so that was the founding of Berkeley. But now Berkeley is way beyond all those things. Now we have hip hop, and we have funk,
What?
and we have R&B, and we have turntables, and we have heavy metal. We have pretty much, you name it. We have Brazilian music, Latin music. You can study just about any kind of music you can envision at Berkeley. In addition to that, they still have jazz.
Wow. So
Yeah.
what classes do you teach? Do you teach the same classes every year?
Well, they're always different because the students that take them are different, and that mostly I'm in the ensemble department, and so this involves working with bands, with small bands. They're usually maybe 5 to 8 people in each class, and they're learning a particular kind of music. Maybe it's R&B, maybe it's funk, maybe it's pop. And the whole semester is dedicated to putting a band together, learning how to play together as a group, learning some songs, and then doing a concert at the end of the semester. So that's primarily what I do at Berkeley.
Nice. I just like for people to know who I'm interviewing instead of just plunging right into the book, you know. So does your 9 to 5 job have anything to do with the writing of this book? I mean, are you two totally different people, a musician and professor and writer, or are the two somehow connected?
Well, that's a great question. I would say that music, as you know, being both a musician and a writer, I think music lives on one side of the brain a little bit more than writing. Writing is more of a left brain activity. It's more talking, thinking, words and stuff. And music is, as we know, basically nonverbal and speaks directly, almost bypasses words, if you will. But because I'm a teacher of music, I'm actually talking all the time. And I have found that since I started writing, I'm actually a better teacher now because I know how to explain things more clearly and to put things, you know how it is when you're teaching, you have to put it in such a way that a person understands what you're saying. And the more that I'm writing, the more different ways I know how to explain stuff. And of course, they're connected also in that as a fiction writer now, I'm always on the lookout for great characters. And there's nothing like teaching in a place where you're meeting literally in the course of a year. I meet easily 100 new people every year. So there's all kinds of interesting characters and people and situations and, you know, so I suppose they are connected.
Nice. Very nice. Well, tell us about this book. Now, I was sent this book by your publisher. How do you pronounce it? Penl?
Penl, yes.
Penl. Okay, this is the book. Well, I must have looked really strange because I take the bus now because my van has not worked in months. So I was walking down the street like this, reading it. You know, I was on the bus reading it. I almost missed my stop when I was on my way downtown. And young people were looking at me. They're probably wondering, what is that strange object that middle-aged woman in the back of the bus holding? You know, because I was totally involved in it. So I totally enjoyed it. But I'm wondering, writing fiction. This is your first fiction.
Yes.
Book. Did you approach it differently? Because with your nonfiction, you were writing about your family and history. Yes. And I imagine it was kind of like a scholarly undertaking.
Exactly right. Yes, yes. And this is different. It's both more free and less free at the same time. It's more free in that you can just make things up, which is big fun. You don't have to footnote. You don't have to You can go ahead and put dialogue in people's mouths. And instead of when I was writing a more historic kind of thing, I had to find an actual quote written somewhere, or else I had to use words like must have said, may have said, possibly, you know, those kinds of qualifiers. With fiction, you just go ahead, and if you feel that a person would say something, you just have them say it. However, it's less free in the sense that you must create, especially for a mystery book, you must create a coherent world in which things happen logically. If your main character had a cold in chapter 1, you need to have accounted for that cold and have them take an Advil or something in chapter 2 if you want them to be done with the cold. You can't leave any loose things. They can't drive a Toyota in one chapter and a Honda in the next chapter unless you're going to explain. Everything has to be logical and explained. And it turns out that that is, in fact, quite challenging. Whereas when you do nonfiction, all of those things are kind of handed to you because they're the facts that you're working with.
Or you have to dig for them. I'm sure they're not handed to you.
Yes, you do.
Yeah. So when you write a fiction, a novel, so is it, I mean, I don't write fiction. I'm more of a journalist. So do you have to keep a scorecard of notes? In other words, do you have to make a biography for the characters and every aspect of their lives, like their favorite foods and what they kind of car they drive?
Well, that's a great idea. And this being my first book of fiction, I kind of went at it a little bit haphazardly. But definitely for the sequel that I'm working on now, I definitely went through and, as you say, I wrote a little biography, and certainly biographies of the major characters, the heroine, the bad guy, the best friend, the large characters in the story. You need to have a very clear sense. What would they wear? What do they, what things do they like? Like you said, what kind of food? How is their voice? What does it sound like? That kind of thing.
Okay. Well, I hope it was as fun to write as it was to read, because I'm only a fan of fiction. I don't know how words get on the page at all. But how do you see the way you wrote? I have your nonfiction books and I have this. So it seems that the style of writing is different, and that it's like you consciously wanted to create an easy flow with this. Not that your other books didn't flow.
Right, but it's a definite different style. I
consciously did that. I learned how to do that.
Yes, I consciously made a choice because I wanted a book. I know for myself, when I'm reading a book like this, I want it to be fun. I want it to be easy. I want it to be that feeling of that I can't put it down. It's a little bit like a box of chocolate or something. You just have to keep your Jay's potato chips. You're from Chicago. Jay's potato chips. You can't have just one. And that's the way I want the book to be. I want it to be fun. I don't want people to ever feel like, oh, gee, this is really hard work. This is not a worthy project. This is a fun project. And so I consciously worked on the writing style to keep the sentences very simple, very flowing, not to be too complicated, not too many clauses, not too many commas. Keep it simple, keep it flowing, and keep a rhythm that encourages the person to keep reading.
Okay, now this book is based in Chicago, both of our hometown, and some of the characters in here are kind of familiar in a way.
I thought you might find that. Yes.
You have the smooth, well-dressed alderman and the inner city youth with the doting but fierce grandmother. And I'm
Oh, yeah.
wondering, how did you put your characters together? Because you're not in Chicago anymore and you haven't lived in Chicago for years.
Right.
And I don't know if Boston or Cambridge is enough like Chicago for you to be able to really think back on how people
Mm-hmm.
talk, because you've been able to. I think the way that you captured the speech of the young inner city kid was really spot on. So,
Oh, good. Thank you.
so did you have to really rack your brain to try to remember how Chicagoans talk, or is Boston a good enough substitute?
Well, I mean, of course, Boston has young kids, and young kids have a way of talking that's kind of across the board. But I think also there's a funny thing that I read somewhere about some other writers that sometimes when you leave a place, it's almost easier to observe it and write about it because you're not there and you really have to kind of rely on your memory and think about those special things, what was special about Chicago. Because you're right, Boston has a very different energy from Chicago. Boston is a college town. Not that Chicago doesn't have colleges, but Boston that's pretty much the industry. It's either tech, hospital, or college. That's pretty much the deal in Boston now. And so it does have a different quality. Plus, the south side of Chicago, particularly where my story is based, and the fact that it's a largely African American community in a way that Boston does not have that kind of huge uh, amount of middle class to upper middle class Black people the way Chicago does. Chicago just has more of
I would
that.
have thought that
Boston
Boston would
has,
have more.
hmm?
I would have thought that Boston would have a lot.
They do, but Chicago just has more. They have more Black people, period. Chicago, if you think about when we were growing up in Chicago, the entire South Side, that's a lot of people. And
Yeah.
then you got your West Side, that's another whole universe. Boston is a little bit more a smaller population in that way. And
Mm.
many of the Black people who live in Boston, many of them are from the islands. It feels like there's a lot more. They're from Barbados or from different places. Or they migrated via the East Coast places, Virginia, those kind of places, versus the population in Chicago, many of whom came from Mississippi and Alabama because of the train lines
Mm.
going up. So it's a little bit different quality, but yeah. So I did have to cast my mind back a little bit. But I periodically, of course, go back. I travel back to Chicago, and as soon as I see my mother, I'm immediately transported back to the south side of my youth.
Oh yeah,
So,
yeah. Now I was really pleased to see you mention so many different intersections and businesses
yeah,
not in
yeah,
Chicago, and a lot
yeah.
of, like the lifestyle of your main character was over my head. I couldn't relate to the drinking of the sipping of the Merlot, if I even
Yeah,
right.
no,
But I was deeply moved when you mentioned Harold's Chicken Shack. I was
yep,
deeply. I really
yep.
appreciate that.
Yep, exactly, exactly. Had to have at least a few blasts from the past things. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, what did you do when it comes to working the plot? Because I'm really curious and fascinated about someone just coming up with an idea, just out of the air,
Hmm.
and then creating an entire story with a bunch of characters. And I mean, how do you? Okay, let me ask it this way. I have read in a writer's forum that sometimes writers don't know any more than the reader what's going to happen next. There are other writers who meticulously map out what's going to happen from moment to moment to moment. And I'm wondering what kind of writer you are.
Oh, that's a great question. I think for writing a mystery, because a mystery is something that needs to be, as I said, very logical. You need to create a very coherent world. You need to plant clues. You need to, who did it needs to be a surprise, but it doesn't. It's not fair if you make it out of the blue. You have to have kind of led the reader along to where they could maybe even figure it out if they're paying very close attention. So that kind of a plot, I did sit down and make an outline, an extremely detailed outline of blow by blow what was going to happen in each chapter. I created a kind of overarching kind of trajectory for the plot, that so that I would know how to manage tension and to build tension and to build suspense, and that hopefully it doesn't get boring at any point, because there's always something new coming in. Just as one thing is resolved, a new thing comes. All of those things are planned, very detailed plans.
Well, I really enjoyed reading it, and I couldn't help thinking, because I actually know you, I was just trying to imagine you're writing this, and it must have really been fun. How long does it take to write a book like this?
Well, I've been working on this book. What happened was, each of my previous nonfiction books, when you submit a book hoping to get it published, it always takes basically forever. After you've written the book and you've done the best you can and you've mailed it off to the publisher and they've written you back and said, thank you, we've received it, don't call us, we'll call you. And then many months pass of deafening silence. And from time to time, you can write them little plaintive things like, are you still considering my story? But meanwhile, to keep from going cuckoo, because it's so frustrating, I can't even tell you. You can imagine, I'm sure you've been through it, you're a writer yourself. But to keep from going crazy, I just worked on this other story. So because it was so different from what I'm doing, it was fiction. It was not, quote, serious. There were no footnotes. There were no tomes that I had to get out of the library, and I could just sit down and write. And it was fun, and I just enjoyed it. So on and off, I would say I started working on it maybe in 2011, maybe something like that, maybe even 2010. And it's been through quite a few drafts and a few, submissions to different things, and then receive it back, revise it, and do so. It's been an ongoing project for a few years now.
So when you were writing it, in the middle of writing it, did you ever have any, and I'm asking this for like beginning or young or aspiring writers, did you ever have any period of time where you looked at it and you were like, ooh, I don't know, maybe I'd better start this over, or this isn't working, I'm gonna try again?
Yeah, I did. And in fact, I did start it over a couple times. Because I'd never done anything like this before. And there's a pretty steep learning curve between doing a nonfiction thing, as we were discussing before, as one type of prose and one style and kind of one. And so it took me a little while to do it, and I sent it to a couple of publishers, and one woman actually wrote me back and said the ending, which is not the ending that you read, but another ending. She said, that ending is really not a good idea. You need to rewrite it. and she was right. And I went back and ripped up the whole thing and rewrote the ending and that. So yeah, I would
Now,
say,
another writer would have said, "How dare you?" And
mhm.
I mean, so you learned from that experience. You didn't have the ego problem of saying, "How dare you?"
I had
And
a few minutes. Now, I'm not going to say I'm all that because I was pretty upset for a while and I cried a little bit but I realized in my heart of hearts that she was right because the particular genre, and this is another thing about writing fiction, commercial fiction. I mean, maybe if I want to be a Toni Morrison or something, that's another kind of writing, but I'm just kind of writing commercial fiction. It needs to fit into certain kind of ideas about what your story is going to be. So readers go to the store expecting a certain kind of story. And if your story varies too much from what they expect, it can be difficult and publishers won't take it. So I said this was a cozy mystery, meaning a mystery with very little violence. I mean, of course, people get killed, but there are no graphic scenes of violence. There's no graphic sex. There's no graphic language. You know what I'm saying? It's a lighter thing. So,
I think I would still say that it's for grown-ups, though.
oh, it's absolutely for grown-ups.
I probably wouldn't want my 14-year-old to read it.
No, unless they're, although, you know, kids now, they're pretty grown up. But yes, it's more of a grown up thing. And it's certainly, if you're a grown up, I think you can appreciate a lot of the references. And as a woman, especially because the protagonist is a woman, uh, there are things in there about dating and so on that, yes, they're not graphic, but they're there.
So tell us in a few words what happens without giving away too much. But if someone were to ask you, what is Melody for Murder about? What would you tell them?
Okay, what is it about? It's about a woman named Bertie Bigelow, who is a choir director at a community college on the south side of Chicago. And she's in her, let's say, late 30s, early 40s ish. And although she's very talented and kind of pretty, she always kind of worries about her weight. She thinks she's a little bit too heavy, but you know, she's relatively attractive. Um, the big tragedy in her life is that her husband of 10 years, and they had a wonderful relationship. He was an attorney, but he was killed in a hit and run accident. And now she's kind of left to fend for herself. He was killed when the story begins. He's been gone for 9 months. And so she's a little bit on her own. And then, so her life revolves around this teaching job that she's got at the community college directing the choir. When the story opens, lo and behold, her favorite student that she has trusted and who she's kind of helped along, like her special student that she mentored, really double crosses her in a big and very flagrant and public way that gets her in trouble with her boss and with the community. And so that is kind of the situation that she's faced with at the beginning of the story. This longing for the husband who's no longer there, and now she has to begin a new life as a single woman, and the fact that this student has betrayed her in a very dramatic way. And those things kind of coincide and coalesce to draw her into a situation where someone is killed
Mhm.
and she ends up having to look into the murder.
And in fact, both of these characters, the teacher and the student, end up being suspects.
Yes, she is a
With,
suspect, and her student is a suspect as well.
so that's really interesting for the, she becomes a budding detective. And
Yes, out of necessity.
yeah, and so I don't think I've ever read a story where the detective was also a suspect. That's really intriguing.
Yep,
Very,
yep,
it's
yep.
it's wonderful. It's a wonderful read. I really enjoyed it.
Oh, that's great.
Really
That's great.
enjoyed it. So when it comes to this character, Birdie, I
Mm-hmm.
on purpose made her flawed, yes, yet likable, because I heard you say the word sequel. So she's going to come back, right?
You got that right. I'm working on it right now as we speak. Yes, she is coming back. Probably within the next, I would say, 6 to 8 months, she'll be making an appearance.
Awesome.
Again.
So, without divulging too much, okay, it's just us here. Okay. So give
Mm-hmm.
us a little hint of what the story's about.
Well, um, she's still not, she still that hasn't met a man. She's still kind of missing her husband, but in the second book, she's beginning to step out a little bit more because now a little more time has passed. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and she's developing a little bit more confidence about this ability that she seems to have to solve crimes. And so she ends up being asked to look into a situation that, lo and behold, develops into a murder. It involves, I'm not going to say too much more. I will say the title, which will hopefully also intrigue. The title is going to be Mojo for Murder. And it's
Mm-hmm.
going to have a little bit of the supernatural involved.
Ooh.
Just a little.
You
Oh,
think?
just a little.
And so obviously it's going to be in Chicago again. It's going to be set in Chicago.
Yes, it's in Chicago, and many of the same characters, if you like the characters in the first book, many
I
of
did.
them will reappear.
Do you envision this becoming like a TV series? It sounds like a TV series.
It doesn't? Well, that would be in my dreams. If TV people, if you're out there listening, yes, I envision it as a TV series. I think it could be fun because it's a fun thing. It's not I so many of the things that I see on TV are very like they focus on the gruesome or the graphic or the dire.
Mm-hmm.
Birdie is a little bit more lighthearted. She's got a great sense of humor. She's very warm. And her characters, for the most part, except for the villain, of course, have a warmth to them that I think would be fun to see on TV.
So did you grow up liking certain detectives in books or TV shows when you were a kid?
Absolutely. I grew up on Perry Mason. How about you? That's
Yeah.
what I grew up on. And my dad was a lawyer.
Mm-hmm.
So big shout out to Daddy. He was a lawyer and he was a huge mystery fan. My entire family, my mom, my dad, my uncles, my great aunt Marjorie, they all loved to read mysteries. And we would sit around watching TV and we'd watch Perry Mason, and my dad would like yell at the TV, that's not correct. That's not how they really do it in court. Because, it's all
Well, they
Hollywood.
would always confess, wouldn't they?
Yes, he'd say,
Oh,
you can't do that. He'd yell at the judge, you should be forbidding that. They can't do that. But we all loved it. Yeah, objection, irrelevant and immaterial, and Perry would always say. But yeah, so I grew up loving mysteries and Agatha Christie and all that stuff. I grew up with that. And I think probably my whole life I've been waiting to read a mystery like the one that I wrote, because for all the mysteries that I would read, I never found one that was kind of this kind of flavor. It was set on the South Side. It had African American characters, but it was not necessarily like what they call urban fiction. It wasn't that kind of thing. It was a little bit more like Murder, She Wrote, but on the South Side of Chicago. So it's a different flavor.
Something about your book really occurred to me just now. Very often when people are writing about, Black folks on the South Side of Chicago, it's either the so-called ghetto or the rich or whatever. But in real life, at least in my experience, and maybe in yours too, class is very fluid. I guess unless you're very poor or very rich.
Yeah.
I've noticed that class in Chicago on the South Side is very fluid. I mean, middle class, working class, poor, you could easily go from one to the other very smoothly, depending on how your life goes.
Yep.
And the classes really, they're not self-contained, at least.
No. And I think maybe that also might be to some degree a Chicago thing. I don't know. But I think when we were growing up also, we are old enough now that we grew up and it really was segregated. You didn't have too much choice. Even if you had a lot of money, you were still living on the South Side. And therefore, your neighbor might be a mailman or a telephone operator, and you might be a doctor or whatever. But, we had all kinds of people living on my street of all different income levels. Yeah, it made for a very rich environment, actually. Very rich.
That's what I really took from the book. That's why another reason why I really enjoyed it, because most people don't seem to get that.
No.
When you talk about Black life in Chicago,
right?
You don't have to stick to one class or one neighborhood, because we all, unless, like I said, unless you're on the really low end of the totem pole or the upper end, your life is going to be kind of a mishmash of different in-betweens. I like that. I have to ask you, okay, now you were born in Hyde Park, right?
No, I was born, we used to live, because this is how I knew, your mother and my mother were in a little club, and where you lived there until I was, I think, 8, we lived at 73rd and Prairie. So we were right there, and we didn't move to Hyde Park until later.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay. So I was born in Woodlawn, grew up in Chatham. Later lived in Hyde Park.
Right.
And you grew up in Hyde Park. I was curious. Okay, I expected if you were going to write about, now one of the characters, the young man, is from a low-income neighborhood. I would have thought that you would have chosen Woodlawn, but you chose Inglewood. And I'm wondering, I mean, I was very happy to see Inglewood in print in a good way, because both my folks used to work in Inglewood, and my newspaper was distributed in Inglewood.
Nice.
There's a soft spot in my heart for Inglewood. So why did you choose Inglewood of all neighborhoods?
I think it's interesting. I think it's because long ago, I'm not even sure, Inglewood High School, does it even still exist? I don't know, but my dad went there.
New building. Well, I shouldn't say new, but they used to have like this castle-looking building that Inglewood High School was in, but it's in a newer looking, more modern building. But yes, it exists.
Yeah, no, my father went there, and I've always it just felt like that would be a good place to set my guy. And driving around, he used to, when we were kids growing up, he had a lot of clients who had businesses on 63rd Street there underneath the L and all that. And so it just felt like it would be a good place to put him.
I was very pleased with that, because my dad, when he was a social worker over in Inglewood, I think the office was either 61st or, it was so long ago I don't remember. Around Halsted somewhere.
Yes.
In Halsted a lot, and I was happy to see that.
Yes, I do.
My
Yes.
mom, before she taught at Morgan Park High School, she taught at Parker Elementary School.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay. All right.
we were in Inglewood a lot when I was a kid. So,
Yes.
so when can we expect Mojo for Murder to come out? I want to read it.
Well, that's a great question. I'm working on what is probably about the third draft right now, which means my guess is there's at least probably 3 more drafts to go. Um, so, but I will get busy on it. And because I'm a teacher, my best time for writing is actually in the summer. So I'm going to try to get quite a few words under my belt this summer. And I would guess, sometime next year, not too long.
Okay, okay. So because you have Melody for Murder already out, and you're already a published fiction novel writer, does that mean that this second book it will be easier to get published? Do you automatically have it published by the same publishing company? Is that
Yes,
how?
they will be interested in putting it out. Why? Because it seems to be a proven fact of the book selling business that the more books you have, particularly if it's a series like this, it helps sales because if people like the first one, they're already kind of pre-sold to get the second one, and then there may be people who might buy the second one and they didn't know about the first one yet. And so,
That makes sense. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
mhm.
That's a
So
lot of,
the
yeah.
Penn people will put out unless the next one I give them is so horrible that they're like, oh, ugh.
I don't
But
think you have to worry
I,
about
I don't think so. I think that they will work with me. They have a kind of vested interest in publishing it because it's going to be to their benefit as well if it
that.
comes out. Because more books will sell that way.
Oh, let me tell you about this gentleman. I'm going to get the name of his book wrong. There's a writer in North Carolina. I interviewed him on my
Okay,
radio. We have a radio show. His name is Jason Mott.
Jason
And
Which
Jason Mott.
Mott. Okay.
He's African American. He lives near the ocean, very small town in North Carolina. Ooh, I can't think. I'm going to get this all wrong, but he came out with a novel called The Return.
Okay.
You got to get it, by the way.
Okay.
Um, called The Return. Now, it was his first. It wasn't the first novel he wrote, but it was the first to get published.
Mm.
So the agent, I think it was an. I think it's the right term. I think he got an agent to
Uh-huh.
show the book to publishers, and
Yeah.
just on a lark, the agent, while submitting the book to publishers, also submitted it to what do you call a movie, whoever acquires stories for movies, whatever that's
Oh,
called.
wow.
And
Okay.
the book was picked at the same time it was picked up to be published. It was picked up by a movie company, a TV company.
Wow.
So
Oh.
there's a show called I think it's called Resurrection. I think that's the name
Oh,
of it.
yeah. And that's his story?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. So his book came out, and then a couple months later, the show on ABC came. And if I have the name wrong, I do apologize. But basically, I'll tell you the story so you can recognize it as you Google around.
Mhm.
If I am wrong, you'll find it.
Okay.
So the guy is Jason Mott. So what happens is it starts out with these parents. They've lost their child. The child was 8 years old.
Mhm.
They went on with their lives. They're still grieving, of course, years later. The child would have been like an adult or a teenager or whatever.
Mm.
There's a knock on the door, and the child is there, right there in front of their eyes. He's still 8 years old, and they
Wow.
can't how this is possible. And it's happened in other places where
Wow.
people who have died are returning. Okay,
Oh, okay. Wow, that's out there.
so the only reason I mentioned all that is because maybe, okay, maybe you should consider sending this out as well, especially since it's going to be a series. Because as I read it, I totally envision it being a TV show.
Wow, really? Oh, that's great. Well, make my day. I certainly will consider doing that, and I will mention it to my publisher, who I'm sure will be delighted to look into that for me. Yeah,
Okay.
definitely.
And with that, I really want to thank you for being on the show, Carolyn. And love to your family. I haven't seen your folks in ages.
I know. Well, my mother, believe me, she will be watching this program, and so we'll just give her a big shout out. Hi, Mom, because yes, she'll be really happy to see you.
And David and Stevie and Timmy and
all the people,
members of yours.
Absolutely.
So you have to come on again when your
definitely
Go for Murder comes out.
Okay, definitely.
So thanks so much, Carolyn, for being on the show.
All right, thanks, Pat. Bye.
Absolutely. Bye-bye. Now, if you're an author, if you own an interesting business, if you have an interesting point of view on world happenings, if you just want to come on the show and talk about really interesting things, write to me, Durham Skywriter at gmail.com. Durham Skywriter is named after my newspaper. I actually have an all positive newspaper for Durham, North Carolina. It's online. You can read it at durhamskywriter.com if you want to check that out. And with that, I bid you adieu. Have a good evening. Enjoy the summer. I'll be back next Sunday with another interview. Ciao for now.
It's a melody for murder. You cheated on